Only as the fires splashed like rain onto the flagstones in front of Asurion did Araloth realize that the statues had vanished, replaced by ghostly figures, echoes of Asurion's divine court, the legends of the elven gods brought to life. As the flames leapt higher, Araloth saw Hecate whisper to Khaine, who drew a great black sword and turned upon Cornus. For a time, Khaine fought Cornus with Isha as the prize, the god's movements slow and exaggerated, like actors playing roles. Cornus fell wounded, his echo bursting into fire as the sword pierced his breast. Khaine reached out to claim Isha, but she threw herself into her lover's flames rather than be taken. Both Hecate and Atharti moved to comfort the destroyer, but fell to each other's jealous blows. Of all the gods and goddesses, only Liliath and her other persona, Ladriel, were not present amongst the echoes. The real Liliath stood in the center of the growing pool of flame, though she did not burn. As Atharti fell dead at her sister's hand, Liliath beckoned to Araloth and Kalra to join her within the flames. As Araloth moved towards the flames, the image of Asurion, unmoving to that point, stirred to life. All around him the other gods, or at least those that had not yet been slain by their fellows, suddenly looked up in horror at the skies. The fires were fading now, all save the ring around Liliath, and darkness was drawing in once again. The echoes of the other gods raised their arms as if to ward off some dolorous blow, and Asurion looked directly down at Araloth. Slowly, haltingly, the Creator raised his hands and removed his mask. Beneath, Araloth saw that Asurion's face was identical to his.
Hey, hello everybody, and welcome back into the Philosopher's Den with myself as we continue our diatribe about the world of Khaine and the end times. Sadly, though, amongst our conclave of philosophers, we are missing Vince Venturella, but fear not, folks, because we still have with us the knowledgeable and deeply wise Keith Reedy with us.
Oh,
Please
thank you,
say hello,
Kieran.
Keith.
Very kind words. Hi, everybody. We're back again. Khaine lovers.
Yeah. So upon our last episode, because the Khaine book is such a meaty tome with a lots going on in it, we really just made it through halfway of chapter 1. So we're going to pick it up from there, but to keep everyone abreast of it, Keith, maybe you can take us through the key points that have happened up to this stage.
Sure, I'd love to. So basically what happened was when we started off, Ulta 1 was assailed on all sides by a giant demon incursion. Teclis comes along, he casts a big old spell and gets rid of everything. Tyrion then leads the War of Reclamation to reclaim the lands from the demon incursion. What's happened up north then is a big Khorne army has attacked the Dark Elves. They've lost 3 of their 6 big cities. And Malekith kind of says, screw it, we're making one last-ditch effort to try and take over Ulthuan. But he's met some kind of resistance. His mom, Marathi, has decided that she's not going to help. She's going to send a couple warriors with them, including a very notable character called Drusilla. And Helron has also stayed in Harganeth, having a great time slaughtering a bunch of marauders and stuff. Tyrion has assumed the mantle of the regent of Ulthuan upon finding that Finnebar is dead. He rides out to meet Malekith's forces, which have come down, settled down, and smashed open a very key strategic point called Eagle's Gate. Eventually, and that assault was led by Malus Darkblade. And eventually Tyrion's and Malus's armies meet up. Malus Darkblade, his demon takes over. He's controlled a little bit by Drusilla, and eventually he dies. Along the process, Tyrion has picked up the warp sword of Khaine and is able to command the dead. And it's around this time in our story when Nagash has been reborn. So Tyrion can feel very keenly the loss of his daughter, and he is descending into essentially becoming the avatar of Khaine. Of other great significance, the Dark Elves have managed to bribe the Caledonians with all their knights that they've plundered over the last few hundreds of years. And so now the Caledonians, led by Imric, are very much on the side of the Dark Elves. Yeah, and I think that's about it. Did I miss anything there, Kieran?
No, that's really just the key points, and that brings us to the end of the battle at the Reaver's Mark. One other quick thing that happens of note here is that Teclis reveals his sort of machinations to Tyrion for the first time, and for his efforts, he gets punched in the mouth, but manages to escape before he gets his head lopped off by Sunfang. So it's revealed that Teclis is truly in favor of Malekith's uprising and positioning him as the Phoenix King. He reveals that to Tyrion. Obviously, he's displeased by this. Now, we're going to introduce some new players here. Well, not really new players, but a significant other faction. And that is that while all this business is going on in the Battle of Reaver's Mark, and it starts to fall apart and break down, Liliath is just hanging out on a hillside with her compatriot Araloth of the Wood Elves. So now we have Wood Elves involved. There's also another female elf there with them called Kalara, which is not a name that I had ever encountered before, so this is a new vestige for this tale. In the little diatribe that they have here between Liliath, Araloth gets a little bit uppity about the fact that he did not let, or rather Liliath did not let him intercede on the battle. And she rebuttals to say, well, but if you did, which side would you have chosen? And after thinking about it for a second, he decides, well, he doesn't really know, like, what's right here. Because you can see that Tyrion is descending into madness now that he's touched the warp sword and along the path of Khaine, which every elf feels the fear of because they know Khaine to be either the god of murder or the god of war, depending on what perspective you take on him. So Liliath takes this little moment as a point of teaching a lesson. So after the battlefield clears and the Dark Elves retreat and the High Elves kind of regroup and move off, there is a shrine called Haladra that is positioned right there on the plains of the Reaver's Mark. So she wanders down there with her two compatriots afterwards, and they sit around and they talk about the various gods, because there's an effigy and a sort of a dilapidated stone statue of each of the major elf gods within that circle, including Assyrian, etc., Isha, so on and so forth, except for Liliath. There is no shrine to Liliath there because she's, a real live being walking around in the mortal realm. But what they do here is they wait until absolute darkness at midnight, and then Liliath calls forth the fires of Assyrian in a symbolic way, and the two other elves that are with her go into a little bit of a dream state and experience themselves in that sort of Ranadandra role of the elf gods and how that all played out millennia before. And Araloth is the one that sort of attunes himself with Assyrian, who is the patron and major god. If you want to equate it to Greek mythology, he's like the Zeus of the elves, if you want to think of it that way. Kalara also has her own little dream state that she goes through, but when questioned about it, she doesn't reveal it, aside from to say that she knows her true destiny now, and she knows what she associates with. So, did you take anything more from that little exchange?
Well, it's interesting because it kind of plays out. It explains, at least the first time that I've come across, kind of more about what the War of the Gods was about. So I guess it was all very kind of like high school drama, because Isha likes Kurnos, but Khaine likes Isha, but Isha doesn't like Khaine, and Hakardi likes Khaine, but Khaine doesn't like Hakardi, and so that's where it all sparks off. Hakardi convinces Khaine to murder Kurnos. Isha falls onto the body of Kurnos to protect her, and then Hakardi and her twin sister Athardi kill each other over Khaine's affections. Which I thought it was an interesting insight, but I thought it was kind of, very teenager, angsty way of looking at things.
That is a good way to boil it down, actually. And I can't disagree with you entirely, but you got to go with archetypes, and it's.
Yeah, exactly.
I immediately thought of soap opera rather than a high school movie, but essentially.
There you go. Yeah.
Okay, so anyway, after all this, Lilith reveals to the two elves that they have a mission that she needs to send them on, and they need to, for the sake of this, they need to go into the Chaos Realms. So we have a sort of what would usually be just a little sidebar story in the way that these end times books are written, but this little sidebar story is a good 5 or 6 pages long of a grand adventure that Arloth and Kalara take into the realms of chaos, and they go into Nurgle's garden. So the key points here are they go through this portal, and there they are within the chaos realms, on the bidding of Lilith, and they have to try to find their way. I'm going to kind of skip ahead a little bit, but reveal some things along the way. Is this thing totally feels like the classic D&D adventure, barring meeting some old grizzly man in a tavern in a small town, right, where you get your adventure. But off they go, and they bump around a little bit aimlessly through this realm that is just completely otherworldly, and they bump into a wizened old man who seems to be studying the flora and the fauna, and he's got a book out and he's making notes, and he's very unassuming, and he just explains to them that he's a cartographer and he's been here recording things and making notes for eons, but he knows the place well, so he's willing to be their guide. So off they go, and they get on with this guide. So that's the start of the sort of the party building part of the D&D adventure that I kind of think of. But that's not the only encounter that they have. Maybe you want to pick it up from there and let us know where that takes them.
Sure. So they're wandering around Nurgle's garden, looking for his big old mansion, and so it's not said exactly, but it seems like this scholar is, I think his name is Van Shrike or Van Shriek, you were saying, Kieran, who is the author of the Liber Chaotica. And it's really cool because these are, if you're not familiar, it's a series of books about the various different realms of the Chaos Gods that are actually published, and they're very good reads. It's kind of cool, actually, just as a very quick aside, when he writes about Tzeentch's realm, some of the stuff is in code, so you have to, look at it, read it backwards in a mirror, and, decipher some codes and things like that, which I thought was kind of cool. But anyway, so yeah, they're wandering around, and they come to a kind of a border between Nurgle's realm and Tzeentch's realm, and they find a sorcerer trapped in a crystal. So this is member number 2 of the party, or find number 2 of the party. So the sorcerer is kind of like, hey, come help me out. I'll be able to help you on your quest to free Shalea. And they're like, oh, okay. So essentially what happens is the scribe, Von Shriek, and Arloth, they start going through this big labyrinth and eventually find the sorcerer who is fighting with a reflection of himself. And so then Arloth banishes the reflection, and they all walk out of the crystal maze again, back into Nurgle's realm. And it appears that this... Sorry, you were going to say something, Kieran?
Yeah, I was just going to say, I thought the funny bit about this is that they kind of did the classic old how do you defeat the labyrinth kind of trick, and that is that they just attached a piece of string to themselves.
Yeah.
So that they could trace their way back and find their directions out. So kids, it still works no matter what realm of reality you're in.
Yeah, no, it's fun. Yeah, so it turns out that this guy is, well, who rumors are is that this is Egram Van Horstman, who used to belong to the Light College of the Empire Wizards and then kind of turned to Chaos, but the creator of Van Horstman's Speculum. So it's kind of poetic that he's grappling with an image of himself.
Yeah, and that is sort of the point that why some folks in their discussions about it do point this to Van Horstman, because of that speculum reflection of himself kind of parallel that they draw there. Yeah, exactly. Before we go on, I want to touch on one thing about Von Shriek, And for those of you that want to go look up this little theory, Von Schreck, they actually, Games Workshop printed 4 different Liber Chaotica books, and probably about, I want to say 12 years ago or something around that neighborhood, 10 to 12 years ago, and really kind of wonderful books, and they're sort of patchwork things of stories about the realms of chaos and overlays of parchment that are beautifully done up in the scripture of Von Schreck himself as the great explorer and the scholar. But it's a good aside if you want to go deeper and learn a bit about him. Yeah. So after they get back out of the labyrinth and the D&D party sort of builds, now you have an elf warrior, you have an archer, you have an explorer, and now you have a wizard. So what else do you really need for a D&D party, Keith?
We need a tank. We need a knight.
That's right, you do. So wandering a little bit further as they close in, and the cartographer gets them a little bit closer to Nurgle's mansion, they come across this shining figure of a knight, just absolutely radiant amongst all the filth of Nurgle, and he is beating away rot flies and slashing away and running through the muck, and it looks like there's absolutely shining brilliance in there. The other thing of note, too, is that he seems to have some command of some kind of mystical magics as he's zapping away at rot flies and plague bearers as well. Initially, when I read this, I kind of thought this must be some kind of Bretonnian knight who is favored by his goddess, the Lady of the Lake, and is untouchable. But you had some other thoughts and theories about who this might be.
Yeah, well, again, some of the rumors going around is that you've got this, he's described as a giant who speaks in another language, who, as you said, is shooting like lightning bolts and stuff out of his hand in gleaming silver armor. And so some of the rumors are that he is, in fact, I forget the first name, but Drago, the patriarch or the grandmaster of the Grey Knights, Warhammer 40k Space Marine chapter. Which is kind of interesting. And so, well, I mean, we know that chaos exists in both those, games or universes. So I guess it's not beyond the realm of possibility that he would be wandering around the realm of chaos. So that's one theory.
And it worried some as well when I heard that theory as well. And of course, it worried Warhammer players that they're gonna blow up the Warhammer world and then meld it with the 40k universe. And this was a point at the sort of a crossover of the two universes coming together.
No, I think it was kind of just a tongue-in-cheek, a little kind of funny reference, because I think the lore, I'm not a 40k buff, but I think the lore is that this guy is like eternally lost in the war for the realm of chaos, and he turns up at pivotal moments to turn the tide and then disappears back in his eternal struggle against chaos. So I didn't mind it too much.
Yeah. All right. So anyway, now that the party is fully assembled, with the fighter as well, then they forge on, and they have this brief little thing that they spend a little bit more time upon, and they come to this spot called the Bridge of Fools, and very quickly they get attacked by a beast of Nurgle. And he's all gibbery and jelly-like and throwing himself on things, but they manage to fight him off and distract him, and he slinks away. And the interesting point here is that the knight, of course, being the protector, wants to slay all the evil, so he's going to rush out to slay and finish off this beast of Nurgle. But Araloth actually steps in and stays his hand, and he says, no, he's chased away now. There's no reason to kill this beast. Because it's not necessarily innately evil, so he just essentially builds the case that it's not necessary that we kill everything in here. Let's move on and let's get on with our mission. So they do. So they close in on Nurgle's mansion, and again the knight does his job of distraction, and he says, "I'm just gonna wave my big sword out here and zap some lightning bolts and draw everything out of the mansion, so that you guys have a clear path." So he does that. and the rest of the party kind of heads in, and they come across this point where there is an effigy or a being locked in a cage that's suspended above the floor, that is all emaciated and covered in scabs and buboes. And so what do they discover about this? If you want to take it from that point.
So we're in Nurgle's workshop, and they crack open the cage, and she's all decrepit and, as you said, nasty. And they notice a silver bracelet on her. So Arloth removes this bracelet, and immediately this being begins to heal and transform and becomes the beautiful, radiant Shalea. So at that point, they want to make their getaway, but Kalara stops them and says, "Well, Nurgle's going to know if we take Shalea, he's not going to be happy." So this is where Kalara's vision comes back. So Kalara used to be a priestess of Isha, and the important part is formerly a priestess. So we don't know what happened or what she saw in that vision, but she knew that this was her fate and this was her destiny. So she snatched up the bracelet from Arloth, put it on herself, so then she transformed as well into this absolutely putrescent being that was totally unrecognizable, and stepped back into the cage to take Shalea's place and hopefully fool Nurgle long enough for the crew to escape from the garden.
Yeah, so that's a key point, that she sort of feels that she has to sacrifice herself for the good of the rest. There's a little bit of conjecture about which of the elven gods that she identified with in doing this, and I think that there was. It's not really discussed here in the End Times book, but I think it was Atharti, who was Hekardi's sister.
Yes, that's right.
In the elven pantheon. Is the one that I think makes the most sense that she associates with here. So she sort of gives herself up for the favor of her sister.
Oh, yeah.
At one point in the prior story.
Well, because I think Hathardi as well is like the goddess of beauty or something. She kind of styled herself as being the pretty one, if I recall.
Hekardi? Yeah. Well, she's technically just labeled as the god of sorcery, but she parallels Marathi in a lot of ways, or maybe the other way around.
No,
Marathi parallels Hekardi.
Athardi is the goddess of pleasure.
Yes.
Yeah. And then Hekardi is the goddess of sorcery.
Right.
There we go.
Yeah, but there is again, it's not outlined in the End Times story, but in some prior snippet, I'm really foggy about this right now, whether it was actually in a Dark Elf Army book in the past or a High Elf Army book, where it touches on that relationship of Hekarti, Liliath, and Atharti, and the trio of them and their god works. And I do simply remember that there was a point where I think it was Atharti that sort of sacrificed herself to save her sister. So that's why I kind of think of her action here, Kalara's action here, as sacrificing herself to save Shalaya and free her.
Oh, okay.
Okay. Now again, the time that this is happening, let's harken back to Nagash for a second, because as we said, Geheimnisnacht just happened at the end of the Battle of the Reaver's Mark, and Nagash was realized, and the Empire was at that point being overrun by Nurgle, and the walls to the north were being assaulted by Chaos, etc., etc., and Nurgle was the vanguard of that force. So the Empire really needed the Shalaya to be active and healthy and happy and freed. So that's why, as part of the machinations of Liliath, I think that she engineered this little D&D adventure rescue in the first place.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So now that the job's done, they still need to make their escape. So not that the escape is too significant as far as the storyline of things, but there's a couple of fun things that happen along the way there. Keith, you want to take us through the end of that one?
Yeah, so the Scooby Gang make their exit, and they come across the Knight again, who is fighting hordes of plague bearers and that, and he's basically just impaled on a spear. And then he's just like, no, don't worry about me, guys. They can't touch me. I'll be fine. So everyone's like, oh, okay. So they head back towards the Bridge of Fools to make their exit. And then as they're getting there, Van Horseman, in his ways, he turns on them and is very close to killing Arloth. So he shooting fire at things, and he knocks Arloth off the bridge, and Arloth is just barely clinging on. And of course, the scholar's doing nothing. He's just documenting the whole thing. And but who comes along but our old friend, the Beast of Nurgle, who Arloth saved earlier, and he just gobbles up the sorcerer.
Yeah.
And that was that. He ate him.
Yeah. So that's just another little bit of a life lesson that if you don't have to kill everything, sometimes things can turn out well for you.
Yeah. There you go, kids. Live and not live.
Yeah. So I don't know if I don't know if he did in here, but I kind of imagine that just Arloth probably pats him on the head and throws him a little treat.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the best bit then is that the beast won't leave him alone, and then so Arloth's like, well, I gotta go, and the scholar's like, well, I'm gonna stay here. So the scholar picks up a skull and throws it, just waves it in front of the Beast of Nurgle like he's a dog, and then throws it, and the dog kind of looks at him for a second, thinking it's a trick, and then just runs off after the skull. So himself and Bron Street go and play a little game of fetch, which I thought was a stunning end to this D&D campaign.
Yeah. So in the end, it's Arloth that comes out of all that mess alone. He made some friends along the way, but they were only temporary friends. Left Calera behind to sacrifice herself, and he's going to go back up and join up with Liliath. So from there, then back to the mortal realms, we switch our attention back to Malekith. So the last time that we touched with Malekith, he had blown through Eagle Gate and teamed up with Imric of Calador, and the plan was, at the time, to eventually get to being anointed as the Phoenix King. But he gets word of this Tyrian uprising against Malice Darkblade, and how that Dark Elf army was forced to retreat. And I guess I should also remind us that Malekith was not part of that battle, right? He was a different camp, not part of Malice's opposition there. So, after realizing that Tyrion is on the march and he's going to oppose him from making his direct line through there, they decide that the Bllighted Isle is the place to be, and Malekith and his Dark Elf forces are going to make their way north. Along the way, they get harried quite a bit by another elf force, and this is led by Ystrana, who is of Avalorn, and she's got quite a bit of contingent available to her. Not too much happens aside from harrying them. The dragons of Imric kind of try to burn them out of the forest as they go, but don't seem to be terribly successful. But then another player comes in from the west, and that is the forces of Nagarath. So predominantly shadow warriors and tricksy ambushers. And the Dark Elves find themselves sort of pressed by both sides. At this point, Malekith decides that he needs to make a big push, and Imric is going to be his rear guard. So that's how it works out. Malekith splits off because he decides that he really needs to get to the Bllighted Isle before Tyrion does, and it's Imric that's left to handle the rest. Imric does, because as you can imagine, dragons versus archers, gonna win out. So he eventually does, but there's one kind of moment of where you feel a little bit of Imric's remorse here that I want to talk about, and that is that he has a bit of a showdown with Ystrana at the very end of it, in the conclusion of it. And after burning a bunch of elves and burning loads of woods with dragon fire and chasing off shadow warriors, he does lose a number of his compatriots along the way, of course, but he eventually just skewers Ystrana on his Starlance in a big epic conclusion to the battle. But with a tear in his eye, and after the battlefield is cleared, holds a funeral pyre all by himself, refusing help for anybody else for Istrana because he honors her and reveres her so much. And then before we switch away from this battle, there's one other interesting note, and that is that Arloth appears with a contingent of wood elves, and he wants to pay his respects to Istrana as well, but also at the same time offer up an alliance with I guess Malekith by virtue of joining with Imric. Okay. So, you have more thoughts about that one?
There's just a really nice bit at the end of that where Arloth is kind of like, okay, Imric, we got to go. We're on the same side. You know, this is all about Teclis and Livia's plan. And Imric kind of says disdainfully, I don't follow the machinations of your prophetess god. I follow Kalidor. Kalidor Dragon Tamer. Dragon Tamer, Dragon Rider. Dragon Tamer.
Dragon Tamer? Yeah.
Dragon Tamer. And yeah, he follows Dragon Tamer. And Arloth kind of gives this little half smile. It's just like, it's all the same at this point. You don't even know the strings that are getting pulled. I think you get the sense that Arloth kind of, he knows that his strings are being pulled, and he kind of gets a glimpse of it, but at the end of the day, it doesn't make a difference who you follow as long as you're doing this. So I thought that was kind of cool. And then they say that they're going to open up the world routes because they're going somewhere that they need to get there fast, that no dragon can possibly get them there that quick. So we'll wait and see what that is.
Yes. Yeah, we have to sort of unwind the web a little bit.
Exactly.
Okay, so elsewhere, because of Imric's actions, Malekith is afforded the time that he needs to sort of scurry free of the elven trap, and he does get himself to the Bllighted Isle. Now let's remind ourselves that why is the Bllighted Isle so important? Well, this is where the altar of Khaine is, and the great sword of Widowmaker, and the wielder of the Widowmaker, as Malekith has always believed, will have dominion over all the elves. Tyrion also sees the importance of that because it will grant him the power he needs to fight off the Dark Elves and beat them back and make them safe in Elfwine forever. So it's a bit of a race for these two heroes of their respective nations to get there. It eventually culminates, but Keith, do you want to talk about any of the events leading up to the final showdown, the inevitable showdown between Tyrion and Malekith?
I mean, there's a lot there, and they definitely go into the battle in great detail. A couple of key points is there are two more generic elf lords that are there. Their names are Anaran and Anarel. One of them is the fighty one is the wizard. So there's a very interesting description of Kauron Darkhand, who, like Talaris that we mentioned in the previous episode, used to just be a unit champion upgrade, but now he's made it to the status of hero. So those two, himself and Anaran, have a little one-on-one showdown, and it ends with Kauron kills Anaran, and then Alathanar steps in and just totally wipes the floor with Kauron. So,
yeah,
and
that's
then, of course,
an important introduction, I guess, of Alathanar finally revealing himself. He's a guy of quite significance. Like he's an elf lord that has always been the greatest enemy, maybe even more so than Tyrion and Teclis, to the Dark Elves, because he's always been on the coast thwarting raids, etc., and has been the bane of hundreds of Dark Elf raids in the past. So if there is anybody that's so very infamous amongst the Dark Elf society as a mortal enemy, it is Alathanar that is that mortal enemy. So he's a very significant guy to show up there.
Yeah, and throughout the entire Khaine book, actually, I think this is one of the first times we're mentioning him, but Kauron Darkhand is kind of, he's the captain of the Blackguard, so he's kind of Malekith's go-to guy, and he's being played up as this like really big character, like really tough to kill, very hardcore, and then he pretty much takes apart the generic fighty elf prince pretty handily. And then when you show down to Alathanar, it describes Alathanar's skill just as he dodges 5 blows and then just cuts off his head. in almost a blasé manner, but I think it's building it up that Charon's really great, and then Alathanar is way up here, just totally out of his league.
Yeah, I agree. The other imagery that I kind of liked in this story lead up when we're talking about the back and forth in the battle is that Malekith is there on Seraphon, of course, his mighty black dragon, and with a few other dragons in tow that he's managed to keep with him from the Caledonian force. And they're having this great sky battle against the Griffins of Tor Gaval. And it kind of just paints for me as a High Elf fan a nice image of some possibility that you could have a whole unit or contingent of Griffin riding High Elf heroes, right? And
50% Lords and Heroes.
Yeah, that would be great. I'd watch that movie.
Yeah, definitely. Dragons versus Griffins. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'd play that game.
So I guess the only one other key thing you mentioned, the other sort of generic high elf that they introduced here, Anarel is her name, and she's coming into this. They describe her as a pretty mundane, average skilled wizardess, but augmented very much by the attunement to the magic that's on the Bllighted Isle and around the Shrine of Khaine. So she's actually having a reasonable time in casting her magics and thwarting the Dark Elves and even opposing and counterspelling some of Malekith's action that he's doing. Until Malekith just identifies what the trouble is and has Seraphim swoop down and it says just tears her to shreds and scatters her across the rocky hillside. Just like that. Yeah. So again, another comparative thing that Anarel's at this level and Malekith is over here at this level.
Yeah.
Yeah. Not equals. Okay. Well, so now that whole preamble is out of the way, the High Elves that are defending the Isle here, led by these two elves that we talk about who have met their untimely end, luckily have delayed things long enough that Tyrion has arrived, and he swiftly gets there on Malhandir, his great swift steed. They describe Malhandir as even being able to outpace a flying phoenix, ridden by Caradrian, because Caradrian arrives in Tyrion's wake as well, and with Corhill and with Marathi and with all the rest of the Tyrion's followers, they tell Tyrion, you know what, we can't wait anymore. You don't hang with us. You just get ahead and go. And he says, all right, Caradrian, you can keep up with me. Let's go. But Caradrian can't keep up with him, which is a cool thing to imagine how swift that horse is. Yeah. So off they go. Marathi also reveals something very, very kind of earth-shaking here, I think, in a way. And that is that if we remember back when she, in the guise of Drusilla, presented herself outside of the fortress before they left Nagaron and said, you know what, I'm going to give you a token force to go with you to Ulthuan. And of course Malekith was wary about that and sort of kept them apart. So only a fraction of his force here at the Bllighted Isle was those troops that had come on behest of Drusilla. But she, once she arrives at the battle, she sets off her enchantments, and all of these followers of hers, and it says it wasn't even just the ones that she had set forth and offered as help, but all of her followers, including the seeds that she had planted in amongst the other regiments of Malekith's, turned on their brothers. So now we have Dark Elves fighting Dark Elves, and High Elves fighting Dark Elves, and it just turns into a bloody affair. A couple other characters introduce themselves as well, because it is Alathanar that sort of springs forth after slaying Quran, and he sees Seraphon in the sky and lights up Seraphon with the moonbow. The moonbow is a pretty significant thing, blessed by Liliath, and if this helps Warhammer players to parallel it, it works like a bolt thrower. So Seraphon has just been struck with a bolt thrower, and pierces a wing, and he goes down, like just crashes into the hillside with a gigantic thump that shakes the earth, and Malekith is temporarily spilled from the saddle. At this point, a whole bunch of high elves kind of close in on him, trying to do Malekith in, but Malekith whips out the wizardry and starts crackling them with black lightning and other horrible things and zapping them back, and he makes his way clear so that he can actually get right to the altar of Khaine. Now I've been talking for a bit, so maybe I'll pass to you if you want to take it from there, Keith.
Yeah, so it's about that time. So Seraphon's down, and Malekith has slithered his way up to the Shrine of Khaine, and that's when Morathi releases her spell to turn some of the Dark Elves against each other. And lo and behold, but who should be there but old Shadowblade himself. So remember, when Shadowblade was spying on Teclis and Imric and Malekith, and then he pops down at the bottom of the tower, he runs into Drusilla, and she basically says, "Oh, your shenanigans are over." Well, she put him under a spell, because of course that's Morathi, and sent him in and amongst Malekith's ranks. So she snaps her fingers, and Shadowblade pops out and starts going for Malekith. And Malekith is completely taken unawares. Shadowblade is coming out of the sky, and he aims this mighty blow that would just crush Malekith's vertebrae. But unfortunately, because of all of the sorcery, Shadowblade's reflexes and timing are just a little bit off. So Malekith is able to throw up an arm in the way, and instead the dagger becomes lodged in his shoulder. The long and the short of it is Malekith is fighting him. Seraphon is helping out. Shadowblade gets smacked into a wall and kind of gets like knocked out or something. But Malekith is injured at this point. He's got a dagger in his shoulder, bleeding. He's taking a couple hits, and Seraphon as well is not doing too well. So then Tyrion shows up on Malhandir, as you said, and they start going blow for blow. So Malekith's still on top of Seraphon. They're fighting, and they really are quite evenly matched. So it describes that in the first few passes, all Malekith is able to do is knock Tyrion's helmet off. But instead, Tyrion's able to get a couple blows in with Sunfang and do quite a bit of damage to Malekith. But then the sorceries come out, and Malekith shoots fire all over Malhandir, which is wrecking this horse. But also significantly, he doesn't get his 2-up ward save against fire. Tyrion doesn't, because he knocked his hat off. So his face is getting burned, and everything's terrible. But Malhandir, fortunately, is quite bright for a horse, so he jumps at Malekith and knocks him back off Seraphon. And this gives Tyrion a bit of a chance to recover. So Malekith he's taking a stab to the gut now. He's got still Shadowblade's dagger sitting in his shoulder, and Tyrion is standing over him, and he realizes he can't win this. So Tyrion cracks down with a mighty blow. Malekith goes to parry, and then the Destroyer, which is Malekith's sword, is shattered. And at this point, our old buddy Teclis shows up. Do you want to take it for a bit here, Kieran?
Yeah, good old Teclis. Really quickly, I just want to make it all the folks aware that Malekith did at least have the strength to beat Shadowblade off. Mm-hmm. Despite the wound in his shoulder, he smacked Shadowblade around, got a hand on him, threw him into a pillar. And that knocked the sense back into Shadowblade. So let's remember that Shadowblade is a disciple of Helbron, not Morathi initially. So that knock to his head effectively broke the enchantment that Morathi had, and he just said, "Oh, good golly, I got to get out of here." And although it doesn't happen right away, a little bit of aftermath I'll jump to right now, and that is that we see Shadowblade effectively get onto a ship and assassinate the crew and sail back to Nagaroth to go back to Helbron's house. So that's what happens over there. But yes, back to the immediate present. Teclis does show up on his steed of shadows, and he intervenes and tries to convince Tyrion to go no further, right? He tries to appeal to him once again that the grand plan and the saving of their race involves Malekith going through the fires and becoming the Phoenix King, and that's the only way that it's going to happen. Essentially, at this time, Teclis is also pleading upon him to not grab the Widowmaker either. And that's where things get really exciting. So after this quick little exchange with Tyrion and his brother Teclis, there's a load of things that all kind of happen in very, very quick succession here that are worth a mention. First off, we note that Caradrian has been circling around the skies with on Asharti. He's finally caught up to the swiftness of Malhandir. So he's going to come into play here in a second. But Teclis effectively all this time has been buying a little bit of time while he's chatting it up with Tyrion, and releases a spell on him to kind of bind Tyrion and hold him in place, because Teclis is going to try to scurry away with Malekith. Again, Teclis unfortunately gets another punch in the mouth for his efforts, and he's a frail little old wizard himself, so he takes that pretty hard, just staggered by it, because Tyrion's no slouch in the boxing ring, apparently. But then it's only a temporary hold, I guess, is the key point here, and Tyrion breaks those bonds that Teclis has created, and then steps up and is about to murder Malekith. And Alathanar has also approached the hillside, and remember, this guy hates the heck out of every dark elf still, like nobody's business. This is his job in life, is to kill every single dark elf. And given the opportunity to kill the king of the dark elves, Malekith, is the dream come true that he's been waiting for forever. So he knocks the moonbow one more time and aims it straight for Malekith's brain. But Teclis realizes this at the same time and casts a little bit of an enchantment. And the reason why he says he's able to do this is because Teclis is the embodiment of Liliath. He has the moon staff of Liliath. Alathanar has the moon bow of Liliath, which is enchanted by her. So he does just enough to put some influence on the bow so it would miss Malekith. The unfortunate or fortunate grace of this is where that arrow goes instead, right? And it hammers into Tyrion instead and knocks him back. And this buys the time that the Teclis needs to worry his escape. And I feel that I'm sort of missing something out of sequence here, Keith. So if you jump in and notice something.
At the same time as Alathanar is knocking his moonbow, Caradrian jumps down off his phoenix. And there's this really great exchange because Caradrian, being a phoenix guard, he knows when he's going to die. So he jumps off his phoenix, and Tyrion kind of scoffs and said, "Well, you're a little late to the party there, friend. I guess you can hold him for me while I lop his head off." And Caradrian just kind of shakes his head and doesn't do anything, because of course he doesn't speak. And he thinks this is the moment that he's about to die. And Tyrion remarks how he is surrounded by nothing but serpents. He is just completely beset on all sides by traitors. His twin brother, he thinks, is betraying him. His loyal Phoenix Guard is betraying him. So Tyrion steps up again to kill Malekith, and Caradrian says, first word he said in 100 years, no. And just as Tyrion is going to strike off Caradrian's head, that's when the moonbow hits him. So it's almost as if when Caradrian decided to speak, it broke his pact with Asuryan, and that then made it so that when his prophesied death was going to occur, it didn't actually happen, which I thought was kind of cool.
Right. And the key point here as well is we should note that, and I skipped over this too, is this is where Tyrion actually snatches up at last the Widowmaker from the altar. And it's with Widowmaker that he's about to swipe down Malekith. Caradrian steps in between, and he's about to swipe down Caradrian while Malekith is supposedly getting shot by Alathanar, which, as we just revealed, the shot goes into Tyrion instead. So with Caradrian obviously his destiny, to speak about that, is he had envisioned that this would be his end. And with shock and awe, realizing this is not his end, but he's turned against Tyrion now by revealing himself. He is now in camp in that instant with Teclis and Malekith. So that little trio scurries off while Tyrion tumbles down the hill a little bit, and down the hill with all the dark elf, high elf action that has been going on, that battle breaks apart and starts to come to its close at this time here. So to recap, what we've got going on here is Alathanar has had an errant bow shot, and he's just shot Tyrion. So he slinks away into the woods as well, because he doesn't want to be, caught shooting Tyrion, which is effectively what he's done. And then the battle kind of calms down. Now, Morathi finally comes out of her hiding spot in the distance and sweeps down, and she doesn't have a disguise on at all anymore. She's not trying to be a different Drusilla. She's not trying to be whatever other name she gave herself while she was pretending to be an elf handmaiden. She just strides out there as Morathi and has to put a lot of effort into enchanting the high elves to be under her sway. So this really does exhibit a great deal of magical prowess from Morathi, more than just controlling one or two minds. She's effectively controlling whatever's left of the armies down there. Even Core Hill, although it mentions that Core Hill has a little bit of resistance to her, he still doesn't have enough resistance to lop her head off like he wants to, because it's Morathi. But effectively, they make their way to the top of the altar, Core Hill and Morathi, and discover the ruined body of Tyrion there, who's been pierced by the moonbow. They gather him up. Core Hill also makes a point of having people gather up Malhandir and treating him with a similar respect. And they bring him back down into the camp, and Morathi works all day and all night working on healing Tyrion to get him back to health. And other things that go on in the aftermath here, we kind of touched on this already, but Shadowblade was escaping back to Nagroth. Alathanar, the next day, and I just want to quickly lead to this, and then I'll pass it on to you to talk about some other folks, is the next day Tyrion comes forth out of his tent strong and healthy again. So whatever Morathi has done with her dark magics to heal him up has done the trick, and he goes out waving the Widowmaker in the air and declaring himself as the leader of the united elf force, and they're going to go forth and conquer under his guise. And it's probably worth reading this passage here as Tyrion's diatribe. He says, "I bear Anarion's armor. I carry his sword. His blood runs through my veins. You owe me your allegiance." And the response from the gathered elves was immediate and deafening in its fervor. Alathanar, who's watching this from a distance, felt that an old and terrible magic clawed his soul, and knew at once it would claim him if he stayed. Turning, the Shadow King slipped away into the rocks, trying to ignore the worry gnawing at his heart. So this is where I think this is significant, because what he's alluding to here and what Alathanar is feeling is that overwhelming urge of frenzy and bloodlust that is filling all of the elves, well, Tyrion first and foremost, but all the elves who are following Tyrion, with what the elf nation has feared all along, and that is the taint of Khaine and what that would bring. So there's a big deal. It's time for a title shot. Khaine. This is what Khaine does. Anyway, so Keith, we have another player that comes in on the other side of the world here that we have to sort of sweep away here for just a quick moment. Remember this quick segment?
I don't think so.
We're going to speak to Alariel.
Oh, that's right. Yes. So Alariel is in Athaloran, and she's kind of being backed. She's presenting herself as kind of the reborn Ariel and the new embodiment of Isha. So she's essentially gathering up the Wood Elves and says it's time to go to war. And she's got the backing of Maestra and Arahan as well. So this is when the elves or the Wood Elves anyway, are certainly going to start making themselves involved in the affairs of the world.
Yeah, so this is where they take to the world roots and bring themselves all the way over to Ulthuan to get themselves involved. Okay.
Yeah.
And then, of course, the other avenue to wrap up here is Teclis has hurried away with Malekith's broken body and Caradrian, and they are carried by dragon wings to meet their ultimate goal, and that is to get to the Shrine of Asurion and make Malekith go through the ritual so that he can become the Phoenix King. Did you want to bring us through this episode and tell us the key points that you remembered as being important?
Sure. So they're standing in the Shrine of Asurion, and Malekith is absolutely grievously wounded. He's bleeding through the armor of midnight, and Technos is kind of saying to him, look, the only way that you're going to survive and can come out of this is if you go into the flames and you survive and become the next Phoenix King. And so here's when we see a very clear division of where the elves are thrown in, and not just high elves versus dark elves, but this is where people start following Malekith as the chosen of Asurion, and when people want to start choosing Tyrion as the chosen of King. So the Phoenix Guard have definitely thrown their lot in with Malekith at this point. But also we know that Admiral Ashling, who had sailed Tyrion across Ulthuan earlier on, he's bombarding the walls of the shrine at the same time. So they don't have much time. Malekith really needs to make up his mind. And then there's this really kind of interesting dialogue where Teclis is kind of convincing Malekith that, no, you are the true Phoenix King. If you just stayed in the flames for 1 second longer the first time you did this, you would have been fine. Every other Phoenix King after you has been false, and that's why they need to have magical enchantments in order to survive the flames. And they reveal, or they talk about this thing that's kind of mentioned here and there, which is called the Curse of Anarion, or the Curse of Asurion, the Curse of Anarion, where essentially all of the Phoenix Kings after Anarion go mad. So they suffer from insanities or a loss of faith, essentially. And it's revealed that Finnebar has actually realized what the Curse of Anarion is and tells Teclis this. And in the end, he was happy to die because he realized that he was not, in fact, the right heir to being the Phoenix King. And that that curse will be broken when Malekith takes on the mantle because he is supposed to be the true rightful heir of Asurion. So Malekith is convinced he really doesn't have any other option at this point, and so he steps into the fight.
Yeah, I think you made a couple of key points there, and Teclis does really quite a job of convincing him. You can tell a little bit that there is a fear in Malekith because he did fail at this once before. It burned his flesh, and that's why he wears the armor of midnight now. Mm-hmm. And the kind of words that Teclis uses here is he says that all of the prior Phoenix Kings always had a little bit of a guilt about the falseness that they felt about their ascendancy to the Phoenix crown. And he explains to Malekith, and he says, so you remember that Finnebar really didn't contest you at all when you murdered him, and that's partly because he knew he was in the wrong, and he shouldn't have been the Phoenix King in the first place. But throughout this, the other thing that I thought was very subtle, and I want to point out, is that Malekith refers to himself in the majesty sense of things as us when he talks about himself. For instance, the quote is, "The flame rejected us once. Why would it not do so to us again?" And he refers to himself as we. When he gets to the point where he's going to step into the fire and he's finally convinced, he refers to himself as I will do this. I will step into the fire. So that's a little bit of, subtle evolution. Read into that what you will. But I think that means that Malekith is sort of coming down off the absolute arrogance, it's all about me kind of thing, and moving over towards it's about the elf nation in the future. And so that really brings us to the conclusion of this chapter, where so much things have happened in the elf nation as it goes along. But is there any other quick things you wanted to say about that final few steps?
No, I think you summed it up there. Actually, I didn't notice that the switch from the royal we to saying I, so that was kind of interesting. I guess the other interesting point is that when Tyrion is giving his big speech and he says, "I'm in the armor of Anarion and I'm his heir," or "I'm his heir," you rightfully should follow me. Anarion is the chosen of Asuryan, but Tyrion has now set himself up as the chosen of Khaine. So there's that interesting dichotomy of the two lives, be both at the same time, the Phoenix King and the chosen of Khaine.
Yeah, and I think at this point it's probably because there's still at that stage a little bit of a denial in Tyrion that that he would succumb to the powers of Khaine and to become what is prophesized. He's a powerful enough warrior and has led his people so long that I think he still believes that he can control that.
Yeah.
At this point, and not go entirely into the murderous berserk rampage that is deemed to be associated with Khaine.
Well, and that's the classical, that's the curse of the elven race, right? That arrogance. They say how, chaos doesn't affect them, they're not tainted, but they are, and it's that arrogance that taints them. And so he's displaying that in fine form when he says that, I think.
Yeah. So obviously there's much more to go here for the elven nations, but we're going to bring a conclusion to this episode pretty shortly. But before we do, as we kind of always like to do, is there any moment here over the entirety of the whole chapter that you felt was either a big moment of great excitement or balderdash or nonsense for you?
The biggest balderdash, I think, was the Battle of Eagle's Gate when they charged it with cavalry. That didn't work. They charged it with infantry. That didn't work. They went back to charging with cavalry again.
Yeah. Oh well.
Yeah, I mean, yeah.
The more you try.
Yeah. How about you? Do you have anything?
Well, oddly enough, with all these great sweeping things, there's two things that I want to say, and that is that the associations with tying in the mortal realm with the godly realm happens quite a bit through this elf story. And it sort of props them up as the elder race and the most attuned with their gods. So I kind of like that. It feels like a greater tale than it is because of that association, I think.
Mm-hmm.
So it bodes well for the future of the story, I think.
Yeah, I think so too. I'm also very much liking how they're setting up the splitting, or maybe even the reconciliation of the elf nation. Because I distinctly remember when rumors of this book was released and they're going to combine, dark elves will fight beside high elves, and you're just like, oh, it's stupid, they've got hundreds of years of race hate, like, this is ridiculous, why would they ever do that? And I think they do an excellent job of kind of saying, well, it's not just, all the high elves hate all the dark elves, there are personalities involved, right? Individual high and dark elves are throwing their lot in with personalities and individuals, not just with their countrymen. And I think they did that really, really well throughout the book.
Yeah. So on that note, actually, what was there a particular thing that you really bought into? Because as you say, and I was with you as well, I was really trying to understand how they would reconcile that, how they would reconcile such hatred of millennia with these two elf races, and how they could possibly convince me to bring it together. For instance, I said in the earlier part of it that I kind of had a real trouble with Imric joining in with Malekith so seemingly easily, So I had to really read again that whole offering of dragon eggs to buy his allegiance.
Mm-hmm.
But what was it for you that made you sort of buy into the fact that this could be possible?
I think I think the Imric thing is done very well because Imric clearly regrets. He doesn't like what he's doing, but the dragon eggs are good, and the fact that Kalidor Dragon Tamer is telling him to do it, he can get on board with that, right? So I mean, it's this idea that of war that he himself isn't happy with what he's doing, but his commander, or the person he looks up to, the person who inspires him, is telling him to do that, and so therefore his men see that same thing in himself as well. So that when he commands them to do things like kill fellow elves, they don't want to do it, but they'll do it. It's the same with so Tyrion, I think, is a great example. So in the Dark Elf society, all they worship is Khaine. And Malekith saw that so that he could basically stamp out. He didn't like Asuryan, and he wanted to stamp out any kind of hint of a pleasure cult in the form of Slaanesh. And there's a bunch of reasons why he did it. But anyway, Khaine was the primary deity of the Dark Elf pantheon. So it's not unreasonable to expect that a bunch of Dark Elves would then start worshipping the embodiment of Khaine.
Right.
They fix a bunch of stuff with magic did it, right? So the power of Khaine radiates off and it fills the elves with bloodlust. And so that's why Alathanar have to get out of there, because he feels that ancient magic taking over. But I think it's subtly done, and I think it's well done at that.
Yeah. I think for me, ultimately, I'll admit to you this, at this point in the story, being a High Elf sympathizer primarily, I'm still not convinced. I can understand your perspective that it's easy for the Dark Elves to come over to the Khaine side and say, yeah, right. Tyrion, man, I want to be a piece of your action. But I'm still having trouble with the High Elf society embracing that just because of followers of Tyrion. That's not enough. But anyway, I might be convinced as we read on into the future of this Khaine tome. But for the moment,
I think Lilith put it best when she said to Arloth, when Arloth said, "Well, we should go down there and help," and Lilith kind of said, "Well, which side would you help?"
Yeah.
It's so ambiguous.
Okay, anyway. So viewers out there in YouTube land, we'll leave you with Keith's thought for the day there of which side would you side with if you were told by Lilith to choose. And then in the next episode, we will resume with more of Khaine in the end times. Good night.
Night.
Malekith pulled free from Caradhrian. He took 3 staggering steps towards the flame, then stopped. "If we pass into the fire," he said without turning, "our very striving has been a lie." His voice seemed almost wistful. Teclis waited for a moment before speaking, then chose his words carefully. "Does that cause you to regret your deeds?" he asked. "No," said Malekith softly. But then his voice grew harder. "No. We would do it all again. I would do it all again." "Then nothing about you was ever a lie," said Teclis, "and by your words you prove yourselves no better than those who stole the throne." He sighed. "But you are Azurian's choice, nonetheless. All that is left of our Creator waits for you in the fire. If you can withstand the pain, there is, perhaps, a chance for us all." "And if I cannot?" Malekith asked. "Then the last spark of Asuryan will fade, and those of our people who survive Tyrion's madness will be consumed by the Dark Gods." Malekith did not reply, but took the final few steps into the sacred flame. At one moment, he was a black shadow against a brilliant light, and the next, there was just the flame. Then, the screaming began.